Hello and welcome once again to one of my little episodes, let's call it an episode. This week I thought I'd try something a little bit different because today we see everybody looking at their mobile phones and they look at it for everything. But you know, I go back to the days before the war, as some of you do no doubt, and life was so different because today everybody looks at television. You go to the television set and blow me down, you've got endless number of programmes. I have a job to find what I want sometimes, as I have no doubt you do too. But imagine the days with no television, a wireless which you pick up a little bit, and what did you do for entertainment? We used to go to the cinema, but of course the cinema was something which developed from the variety theatre, because that is what I go back to. And before the war, every town had their variety theatre, and the variety theatres were on a circuit, and that circuit went, it must have been hundreds round the country. So of course the acts in those days used to be 7 minutes, that was all. The one act went on just for 7 minutes, and so you used to go, you see these headline people, you know, the top of the bill, and it was remarkable, and every week was different. And so somebody would have a 7-minute act, and they'd get on the circuit, and they could literally go round with that same act, round all the theatres, and to get all around all the theatres in England, to get back to the one that they started from, probably would take years. So they could repeat that act again, and so the artists themselves would have one 7-minute act, which they'd probably spend their whole life doing. It's just quite incredible. Today, you know, with television, people have to produce so much effort, have so many different things, because once you've seen it, millions have seen it, and that's it. They've got to start all over again. But as I say, I go back to the variety days, and it was remarkable. I mean, in my, how shall I say, poverty days, I of course got involved with that. I used to do fire eating, magic, all sorts of things. You'd do anything because there wasn't benefit. If you wanted money, you had to go out and earn it. And I've said this before, it's good in some ways, but it's very difficult in other ways. I mean, as I've said it before, and I think some of you may remember it, the women would stay at home to look after the house, men would go out to work, and every 5 minutes to be somebody knocking on the door, either sell you onions. French used to cycle over from France, cycle, not cars, with onions hanging from the handlebars, and go round all the shops in England and all the houses in England selling their onions. Now, can you see anybody doing that today? It's just incredible. People forget these things. But coming back to entertainment, people didn't have the television, didn't have the radio, and then the big thing following on from the variety theatres were the cinemas. Suddenly somebody discovered the cinema. But a visit to the cinema wasn't like a visit to the cinema today. You used to go to, I remember the Mayfair in Tooting. It was a big, it was the Granada in Tooting. Bella, now stop it. The Granada in Tooting and the Mayfair in Tooting Beck. So it just shows you that every sort of mile or so there was another cinema. And these cinemas were huge. And the people would be queuing round the block to get in. Say, for instance, the show started at 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock. They'd be queuing round the block to get in. You'd get in, and there would be the girls. First of all, you'd find the girls walking around with these trays, selling ice cream, tea, sandwiches, all sorts of bits and pieces. And then, of course, the film would start. And it wasn't just one film. You went to see a major film, and then they have a second film as well, and the news, and halfway between, what would happen? The lights would come up, and blow me down in the bigger cinemas, there the organ would rise up from the depths, this huge organ, and it would come up automatically, and there you'd have an organ recital while they were selling the ice creams and what have you. It's just unbelievable, you know, people who can remember it. It was very impressive, but, you know, today that's all gone. You just go to the cinema, see a film, and that's it. But it was such an occasion going to the cinema. And it was sad to see it decline. The first thing where it declined was they stopped these wonderful programs, and they made it continuous so that you could go in any time and you could come out at the point you came in. And of course they used to have the, was it Paramount News? I think it was Paramount News. Used to have the news, because that was the only news you'd see. You wouldn't hear it on the radio was very limited, no television. And so you get your news from the news programme at the cinema. It seems incredible thinking back on it, but it was the way of life, and people thought that was a big advance, a big step forward. They were going to the cinema. But life changes, and of course today, what do? They've got their mobile phones, and they get so much pleasure from the mobile phones, which is a good thing. Now, I just want to slip in a little bit and about something which I would be very sad if it was forgotten. It's the Admiralty Ferry Crew Association. Now, you've probably never heard of the Admiralty Ferry Crew Association, but in the war, this is in the last major war, the Second World War, it went on from 1939 to 1945. As you can appreciate, they were very short of personnel, and they used to build the ships up in Scotland or wherever, but then they had to be taken from there to where they were going to be used. Say, for instance, they might be being used in Malta, they might be being used in Portsmouth, but they had to be got from the shipyard up in Scotland down to Portsmouth or wherever it was. And so they didn't want to have the seamen to do it because, I mean, they were short supply, they had to be out there fighting, and so this association was formed, the Admiralty Ferry Crew Association, which was retired seamen who took the vessels and delivered them. And it was a very active thing. And I came across it, and I thought, what a wonderful thing. This was after the war, it was still continuing, and I joined it. And of course it was a superb band of men, and it was official with the Navy, and I joined it. And I went down to Portsmouth and they trained me up. I went on a skipper's course, so I got my master's ticket in the Admiralty Ferry Crew Association, and which gave me a lot of pleasure. But it's a shame if a thing like that got forgotten, because after the war we carried it on, and I provided a training ship for the men. We used to go out and we used to go across to thing, and in actual fact one of the what do they call it, the occasions for Dunkirk, you know, used to have every year, all the vessels used to go to Dunkirk. It's not done now, it's forgotten. But and I took a whole Ferry Crew Association, a shipload of men, over for the Dunkirk. So if there are any people who have any knowledge of the Admiralty Ferry Crew Association, do keep it going, because it's a wonderful thing to remember. Now, I've got to try and remember what I'm going to talk to you about. How different life was then as it is now. Because in those days there was so much poverty. We don't realise what poverty is today, but I can remember going, this is around the period of the end of the war and before the war, and seeing children up in the north of England with bare feet. Now can you imagine seeing children in cold weather with bare feet? It's absolutely unthinkable. After the war, immediately after the war, the basic wage was, I think, between £3 and £5 a week. I can remember when I went up, I've told you in part of my life story, I went up to run this factory for this Russian millionaire entrepreneur, and I was taking on staff there at, I think it was either £3 or £5 a week. Well, how can you live on £3 or £5 a week? It was very difficult. It doesn't sound a lot, but that was the basic wage. And it was, I think in the early 70s, suddenly everything doubled in value. I've told you the story how I had a house for sale, and I was buying a house, and I bought it and fixed up the price at £12,000, and I signed the contract. I got him to write a piece of paper out. I agreed to sell at £12,000. A month later, it had doubled in value. Now, can you imagine that happening today? It went up to £25,000 from £12,000. Absolutely unbelievable. We forget these things, but they'll come back. I'm quite sure of it. So this is life as it was, and let me just have a look here. The once again, the poverty, that's what I was talking about. I can remember with my mother going to the fish shop, and it wasn't regarded, people didn't look down their noses at you. We used to buy cod's heads. We couldn't afford proper cod. We used to buy the cod's head, and we used to have lodgers. And I told you before how the husbands would go out to work, the women would stay at home, and every 10 minutes or every half an hour you'd perhaps get 10 or 12 people coming to the door, knocking. They'd like to sharpen your knives, like to clean your windows, like to dig your garden for you. They sell you onions, so many different things. And if you didn't have the money, you had to go out and earn it. But then, of course, it wasn't the benefits as they were. When the benefits started coming in, I've told you how I went up to Maryport in Cumbria, and I got a grant of £250,000 to develop the seafront. And I took on men there, and in those days, this has gone in the 70s, so it's only 10 years later, the wages have gone up to, I can't remember how many men I needed to recruit, and the people were coming in, I was interviewing them, and they were saying, how much are the wages? I'd say, oh, they're £90 a week. And say, oh, 90, I'm getting 70 on benefits, so I'm not going to do a week's work for £20. That was how they looked at it. I gave up interviewing people in the end. I left it to somebody else. I got so fed up with that. But to go from sort of £3 or £5 a week to 70 or £90 a week within 10 years, it's absolutely incredible. We don't realise how inflation has gone up. And now people are talking about today, with the Brexit coming out of Europe, and they're saying how the pound has gone down in value. It's nothing to do with leaving with the Europe. At the present moment, when they announced that they were leaving leaving Europe, they said we're going to print, I can't remember, £350 billion quantitative easing. And what is quantitative easing? It's printing money. So they printed 350 billion pounds notes, which obviously puts the value of the pound down. Nothing to do with leaving Europe. It's their quantitative easing or printing money. But unfortunately today, these sort of things, they're taken for granted, and we accept them and we know it. But I've rambled on now for a long time. Lovely talking to you. The sun's shining. Enjoy Felixstowe. Thank you for looking, and God bless you all.